"They die now, punk." The laugh came first, then the shove. The new inmate slammed against the chain-link gate as it rattled open. Inside the pen, starving canines paced in tight circles, muscles tense, teeth flashing, noses already locked on him. The bullies didn't hesitate. They grabbed him by the collar and threw him inside. The gate clanged shut. The yard went quiet. Everyone knew what happened in the K9 pen. Men didn't come back out. The dogs lowered their heads and began to advance. The inmate didn't scream, didn't run. He slowly raised his hands, palms open, and spoke one calm word. "Down." The lead dog stopped. A guard in the tower stiffened. That command, the tone, the timing. The inmate took one step forward, then another. "Sit." The dogs obeyed, because the man they'd just thrown in wasn't prey. He was their handler. "Stay with me until the end, because what happens next to the men who laughed will make this prison rethink who the real animals are." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Marcus Rodriguez had been transferred to Riverside Correctional after a string of incidents at 3 other facilities. His file read like a catalog of quiet defiance. No violent outbursts, no gang affiliations, just a man who refused to break under pressure. The guards saw weakness in his silence. The inmates smelled blood in the water. What they didn't know was that Marcus had spent 8 years training military working dogs before his conviction. 8 years building trust with animals bred for war, teaching them to distinguish between friend and enemy, between command and chaos. His hands carried scars from teeth that had learned to respect him. His voice held authority that couldn't be faked. The K9 unit at Riverside was a nightmare dressed as rehabilitation. 3 German shepherds kept hungry, kept angry, kept ready to tear apart anyone foolish enough to challenge the established order. Tank, the Alpha, weighed 90 pounds of pure aggression. Diesel and Storm flanked him like shadows, their ribs showing through matted fur, their eyes wild with desperation. The warden called them deterrents. The inmates called them executioners. Guards would joke about feeding troublemakers to the dogs, never imagining someone might actually try it. But Rico Valdez wasn't joking when he cornered Marcus in the laundry room that Tuesday afternoon. Rico ran the South Block with brass knuckles and borrowed authority, collecting debts and settling scores with calculated brutality. He'd built his reputation on breaking quiet men like Marcus, men who thought they could survive by keeping their heads down. "Fresh meat needs seasoning," Rico had said, circling Marcus like a predator sizing up prey. His crew laughed on cue, blocking the exits, savoring the moment before violence erupted. Marcus folded the prison uniform in his hands with methodical precision. His movements stayed calm, controlled, betraying nothing of the calculations running through his mind. He'd seen this dance before in other facilities, other yards, other moments when men mistook silence for surrender. "You hear me talking to you, punk?" Rico stepped closer, close enough that his breath fogged the air between them. "Time you learned how things work around here." The laundry room hummed with industrial washers and the distant echo of conversations from the yard. Steam rose from the machines, creating a haze that made everything feel surreal, disconnected from reality. Marcus set the folded uniform on the table and finally looked Rico in the eye. "I hear you just fine," Marcus said evenly. No challenge in his voice, no fear either, just acknowledgement. That response wasn't what Rico expected. Men were supposed to beg or fight back. They weren't supposed to stand there like they were discussing the weather. The confusion flickered across Rico's face before anger replaced it. "Smart mouth needs adjustment," Rico snarled, gesturing to his crew. "Boys, looks like we got ourselves a volunteer for dog duty." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in Riverside knew about dog duty. It wasn't official policy, more like an unspoken tradition. When someone needed to disappear for a while, when the guards needed plausible deniability, the K9 pen provided a solution. Inmates went in to clean the kennels and came out broken. if they came out at all. Marcus absorbed the threat without flinching. He'd heard similar promises in similar situations from men who thought intimidation was the only language that mattered. What they never understood was that real strength didn't announce itself with threats. It waited, watched, and struck when the moment demanded action. When? Marcus asked simply. The question caught Rico off guard again. Victims weren't supposed to ask for scheduling details. They were supposed to crumble, negotiate, offer bribes or alliances. Rico's crew shifted uncomfortably, uncertain how to read this strange calm in the face of their boss's fury. Tonight, Rico decided, his voice carrying the weight of finality. After lights out, time you met our pets properly. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. Marcus moved through his assigned duties with the same methodical precision he'd shown in the laundry room. Kitchen detail, yard time, evening count. Other inmates gave him the look reserved for dead men walking. Word traveled fast in prison, and everyone knew Rico had marked him for the dogs. Guards whispered among themselves, some placing bets on how long Marcus would last. The smart money was on 30 seconds before the screaming started. The optimists gave him a full minute, but in the corner of the yard, an older inmate named Clarence watched Marcus with different eyes. Clarence had been inside for 15 years, long enough to recognize something the others missed. The way Marcus carried himself, the way his eyes tracked movement, the unconscious way he positioned his body in relation to potential threats. That boy ain't what he seems, Clarence muttered to his cellmate that evening. Got soldier written all over him. His cellmate laughed. Soldier, janitor, don't matter to them dogs. They hungry, and Rico's fixing to serve them dinner. Clarence shook his head, but said nothing more. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way, and some men had to prove themselves in ways that defied explanation. He'd seen enough to know that prison had its own justice, its own way of sorting truth from pretense. As the lights dimmed across the facility, Marcus lay on his narrow bunk and listened to the sounds of confinement. Footsteps in corridors, muffled conversations, the clang of metal on metal. Somewhere in the darkness, 3 dogs paced in their pen, driven mad by hunger and isolation. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shift the balance of power in ways no one could predict. But tonight, Marcus simply waited, his breathing steady, his mind clear, ready for whatever the morning would demand. The morning alarm cut through the silence like a blade. Marcus opened his eyes before the sound fully registered, his internal clock calibrated to wake moments before chaos erupted. Around him, 200 men stirred to life in their concrete boxes, but his focus stayed sharp, centered on what lay ahead. Rico's crew had been watching him since breakfast. Subtle glances across the cafeteria, whispered conversations that died when he passed. The kind of attention that meant business was about to be conducted. Marcus ate his powdered eggs and stale bread with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else, giving no indication he felt their eyes tracking his every movement. The morning passed without incident. Work detail in the machine shop, where Marcus repaired industrial equipment, with hands that remembered more than anyone suspected. His supervisor, a worn-down lifer named Jimmy, noticed the quality of his work, but kept his observations to himself. In prison, noticing too much could be dangerous. "You got experience with this stuff," Jimmy commented, watching Marcus reassemble a complex transmission system without consulting the manual. Marcus tightened the final bolt. Some. That was all he offered. All he ever offered. The less people knew about his background, the safer everyone stayed. But his hands betrayed training that went beyond basic mechanical knowledge. Military precision in every movement. Muscle memory that spoke of years working with equipment designed for war. Lunch brought the first direct confrontation. Rico's lieutenant, a scarred man named Viper, slid onto the bench across from Marcus. The cafeteria noise seemed to dim around their table, other inmates sensing the electricity in the air. "Boss wants to see you after yard time," Viper said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "Says you got an appointment to keep." Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the message without emotion. Viper had expected fear, anger, maybe desperation. The calm acceptance threw him off balance, made him lean forward with confusion creasing his features. "You understand what I'm telling you?" Viper pressed. "Perfectly." The single word hung between them like a challenge. Viper searched Marcus's face for cracks in the composure, finding nothing but steady brown eyes that had seen worse than anything Riverside could offer. He left the table frustrated, uncertain why the conversation felt like a defeat instead of a victory. Yard time arrived with the weight of ceremony. Inmates gathered in loose clusters, some playing basketball, others lifting weights, most just walking the perimeter and counting down days until freedom. But today felt different. Electric. Word had spread about the evening's entertainment, and anticipation crackled through the air like static before a storm. Marcus found his usual spot along the far fence, where the view stretched across empty fields toward distant mountains. The landscape reminded him of places he'd served, places where survival depended on reading terrain and understanding the difference between cover and concealment. Prison operated by similar rules, just with different predators. "You know what you're walking into tonight?" Clarence appeared beside him, moving with the careful economy of a man who'd learned to conserve energy for when it mattered. Marcus studied the older man's weathered face. Clarence had the look of someone who'd seen enough violence to recognize its approach from miles away. His question carried genuine concern, not morbid curiosity. "I know enough. Them dogs ain't been fed proper in 3 days," Clarence continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rico's been starving them special for you." The information confirmed what Marcus had already suspected. Rico wasn't just looking to intimidate or injure. This was meant to be permanent, final, a statement that would echo through every conversation in every cell block for months to come. The kind of lesson that kept other quiet men quiet. "Appreciate the warning," Marcus said genuinely. Clarence shook his head. "Warning ain't enough for what's coming. You got people on the outside? Someone who needs to know where you went?" The question hit deeper than intended. Marcus thought of his sister Maria, still believing the official story about his conviction, still sending letters he couldn't bring himself to answer. She deserved better than knowing her brother would disappear in a prison yard, torn apart by animals driven mad with hunger. "Everyone's got people," Marcus replied finally. "Then you best figure out how to get back to them." The afternoon stretched like a held breath. Marcus completed his assigned duties with the same mechanical precision, but beneath the surface, calculations ran constantly. Distance from the K9 pen to the nearest guard tower. Visibility angles in the yard after lights out. The layout of the facility he'd memorized during his first week, noting every exit, every blind spot, every potential advantage. Most important, he thought about the dogs themselves: Tank, Diesel, and Storm. 3 animals twisted by neglect and abuse into weapons their handlers could barely control. The guards saw them as monsters, but Marcus recognized something else: pain, confusion, intelligence trapped behind starvation and trauma. In his cell that evening, Marcus sat on his bunk and listened to the facility settling into night routine. Doors slamming, guards calling count, the distant murmur of televisions from the common areas. Normal sounds that would soon give way to something far from normal. Rico appeared at his cell door just after the 10 o'clock count. No fanfare, no dramatic speeches, just the quiet efficiency of men who'd done this before, who'd refined the process down to its brutal essentials. "Time to go," Rico said simply. Marcus stood without hesitation, moving to the cell door with the same calm he'd shown all day. Rico's crew flanked him as they walked through empty corridors. Their footsteps echoing off concrete walls painted the color of institutional despair. The K9 facility sat in a separate building, connected to the main prison by a covered walkway that offered no escape routes. As they approached, Marcus could hear the dogs stirring, picking up the scent of approaching humans. Low growls rumbled through the air, punctuated by the scratch of claws on concrete. "Last chance to make this easy," Rico offered. though his tone suggested the offer was purely ceremonial. Get on your knees. Beg real nice. Maybe we just rough you up instead. Marcus kept walking, his pace steady, his breathing controlled. The offer wasn't genuine anyway. Rico had invested too much in this moment to accept surrender. His reputation demanded blood, demanded a spectacle that would cement his authority for months to come. They reached the outer gate of the K-9 facility. Beyond it, a narrow corridor led to individual pens where 3 shapes moved in restless patterns. The smell hit immediately. Wet fur, waste, desperation. The dogs had picked up their scent, and the growling intensified into something that sounded like hunger given voice. Rico's crew exchanged glances, suddenly aware they were about to witness something that couldn't be undone. Some acts crossed lines that separated intimidation from murder, and they all knew which side of that line they were approaching. But Rico had passed the point of backing down. His authority depended on following through, on proving that threats made were promises kept. He signaled to Viper, who produced a key ring that jangled like wind chimes in the heavy air. The outer gate swung open with a metallic shriek that seemed to echo through the entire facility. The corridor felt like a tomb as they moved deeper into the K-9 facility. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows against concrete walls, creating a maze of darkness and sickly yellow illumination. Marcus walked between Rico's men, his steps measured, controlled, while behind them the outer gate sealed shut with mechanical finality. The growling ahead grew more intense. Tank's massive form pressed against the inner gate, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth that gleamed like ivory daggers. Diesel and Storm flanked him, their bodies coiled with barely restrained violence, eyes reflecting the dim light like twin fires burning in skulls. "Jesus," whispered one of Rico's crew, a younger man named Snake whose bravado had evaporated the moment they'd entered the facility. The smell of predation hung thick in the air, primal and overwhelming. Rico ignored his crew's discomfort. This was theater as much as punishment, a performance that would echo through every cell block for years to come. He'd built his empire on moments like this, when other men's fear became his power, when violence served as both warning and promise. "Open it," Rico commanded. Viper's hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the keys. The sound of metal on metal seemed impossibly loud in the narrow space, each scratch and click amplified by concrete walls that had witnessed too much suffering already. Marcus stood perfectly still, watching the dogs with eyes that cataloged every detail. Tank's weight distribution, the way his muscles bunched beneath scarred fur. Diesel's nervous energy, pacing in tight figure eights behind the Alpha. Storm's intelligence, visible in how she held back, observing, waiting for the pack dynamics to shift before committing to action. 3 animals driven to madness by neglect, but still animals, still creatures operating by instincts that could be understood, predicted, influenced by someone who spoke their language. The inner gate began to swing open. "Any last words, tough guy?" Rico asked, savoring what he believed would be his final moment of control in this situation. Marcus turned to face him directly for the first time since leaving his cell. When he spoke, his voice carried no fear, no anger, no desperation, just the quiet authority of a man who'd faced far worse than this and lived to remember it. "You should have asked more questions about my background." The gate clanged fully open. Tank lunged forward with 90 pounds of fury behind him, muscles exploding into motion as 3 days of forced starvation drove him toward the fresh meat his handlers had delivered. His paws hit concrete with thunderous impacts, claws scratching for purchase as he closed the distance in heartbeats. Marcus didn't move backward. Instead, he stepped forward into the charge, his voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "Halt!" The command carried weight that transcended language, tone, and circumstance. It came from somewhere deeper than vocal cords, from muscle memory built through thousands of hours working with military animals trained to respond to authority even when their world dissolved into chaos. Tank skidded to a stop 3 feet away, confusion rippling through his massive frame. His momentum carried him sideways, paws scrambling for balance as conflicting instincts warred in his brain. Attack the intruder. Obey the command voice. Protect the pack. Submit to authority. Behind him, Diesel and Storm froze mid-charge, their attack patterns disrupted by their alpha's sudden hesitation. Rico's crew pressed against the outer gate, disbelief written across their faces in stark terror. This wasn't possible. The dogs were killers. Mindless weapons pointed at anyone foolish enough to enter their domain. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. They destroyed. "What the hell?" Viper breathed. Marcus took another step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He kept his shoulders square, his posture upright but non-threatening, projecting calm confidence that spoke directly to the dog's pack instincts. "Down," he said, his voice softer now, but no less authoritative. Tank's massive head tilted slightly, recognition flickering in eyes that had seen too much violence, too much pain. Somewhere beneath the starvation and abuse, genetic memory stirred. The sound of a handler's voice, the feeling of structure, purpose, belonging to something larger than mere survival. The great dog slowly lowered himself to the concrete, his breathing heavy but controlled. Diesel and Storm followed their alpha's lead, their bodies still tense but no longer actively aggressive. Silence crashed through the facility like a physical force. The only sounds were breathing, heartbeats, and the distant hum of fluorescent lights struggling to illuminate a moment that defied every expectation, every assumption about power and control that governed life inside these walls. Marcus moved deeper into the pen, never breaking eye contact with Tank. Each step was calculated, purposeful, designed to reinforce his authority without triggering defensive reactions. When he reached the alpha, he slowly extended his hand, palm down, allowing the dog to catch his scent properly for the first time. Tank's nose flared, processing information that his handlers had never bothered to learn. Beneath the standard prison smells of disinfectant and desperation, he detected something else: familiarity. The scent of someone who'd worked with dogs before, who understood their language, their needs, their capacity for both violence and loyalty. "That's right, boy," Marcus murmured, his voice carrying warmth that had been absent during his confrontation with Rico's crew. "You remember, don't you?" Tank's tail moved once, barely a twitch, but enough to signal a fundamental shift in the dynamic. Diesel crept closer, curiosity overriding caution as he investigated this stranger who spoke their language. Storm remained more distant, but her aggressive posture had melted into watchful attention. Outside the pen, Rico's world was collapsing in real time. His reputation, his authority, his entire understanding of how power worked in this place, all crumbling as he watched a supposedly helpless victim transform into something else entirely. "Impossible," he whispered. Marcus heard him and turned, his hand now resting gently on Tank's massive head. The dog leaned into the touch, starved for positive contact after months of nothing but fear and brutality from his handlers. "You want to know what's impossible?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying across the pen with deadly quiet. "What's impossible is that you idiots have been torturing military working dogs and calling it security." He gestured to Tank, whose breathing had steadied under his touch. "This is a Belgian Malinois, not a German Shepherd, bred for special operations, trained for high-value target acquisition. The scars on his muzzle aren't from fighting other dogs. They're from explosive detection work in combat zones." Rico's face drained of color as the implications hit home. Military dogs, war veterans, animals with training worth more than most inmates would see in their entire lives, reduced to starving weapons in a prison's twisted idea of deterrence. "Diesel here," Marcus continued, moving to the second dog who approached with cautious trust. "Has the muscle development of a patrol dog. Storm's got the intelligence markers of a detection specialist. You've been using million-dollar assets as junkyard mutts. His voice hardened, carrying the edge of genuine anger for the first time since entering the facility. And you've been starving them. Tank rose slowly, positioning himself beside Marcus with protective intent. The message was clear to anyone with eyes to see it. The dynamic had shifted permanently. The prey had become the predator, and the hunters had revealed themselves as nothing more than cruel children playing with forces they couldn't comprehend. How? Viper managed to croak. Marcus scratched Tank behind the ears, earning a low rumble of contentment that sounded nothing like the growls of aggression they'd heard moments before. 8 years training military working dogs, he said simply. Deployed with K-9 units in 3 different combat zones. These animals and I speak the same language. The revelation hit Rico's crew like physical blows. They'd thrown a professional dog handler into a pen with traumatized military animals, expecting entertainment, and finding instead a reunion that exposed their own ignorance and cruelty. The question now, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, is what happens next. Tank moved closer to the gate, his massive frame blocking any clear line of sight to Marcus. Diesel and Storm flanked him, their formation professional, coordinated, the instinctive response of animals who'd once worked as a team and now remembered what that felt like. Rico backed away from the inner gate, his bravado finally cracking under the weight of circumstances spiraling far beyond his control. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. The victim was supposed to scream, beg, break, not stand there like he owned the place while 3 killer dogs treated him like their commanding officer. This isn't over. Rico tried to snarl, but his voice carried more desperation than authority. Marcus smiled for the first time since arriving at Riverside Correctional. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It carried the cold promise of consequences that hadn't even begun to unfold. You're absolutely right, he agreed. It's not over. It's just beginning. It's just beginning. The silence stretched like a wire pulled to breaking point. Outside the pen, Rico's crew pressed against the fence, their faces masks of disbelief and growing terror. What they'd witnessed defied everything they understood about power, control, and survival inside these walls. Marcus remained perfectly still, one hand resting on Tank's head, while Diesel and Storm maintained their protective formation around him. The dogs' breathing had steadied, their postures relaxed but alert, professional, like soldiers awaiting orders from their commanding officer. Open the gate, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Rico's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The simple command hit him like a physical blow because it carried no desperation, no pleading, just the calm expectation of immediate compliance from someone who clearly outranked everyone present. I said open it, Marcus repeated, his tone dropping another degree. Viper's hands trembled as he fumbled for the keys again. The metal clinked against the lock, each sound echoing through the facility like gunshots. Behind him, Snake had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. The gate swung open with that same metallic shriek, but this time the sound carried different meaning entirely. This wasn't an execution chamber opening to receive a victim. This was a cage releasing something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Marcus stepped through the threshold with Tank at his side, Diesel and Storm flanking them like a military escort. The formation was precise, coordinated, speaking to years of training that prison had tried to erase but never could. Rico's crew stumbled backward, their tough guy facades crumbling as they faced the reality of their situation. You made 3 critical mistakes tonight, Marcus said, moving forward with measured steps that forced the gang backward down the corridor. First, you assumed silence meant weakness. Tank's low growl rumbled agreement, a sound that no longer carried aggression, but rather the promise of controlled violence held in check by discipline. Second, you thought these animals were weapons you could point at anyone who challenged you. Diesel moved slightly ahead, his nose testing the air, reading the fear radiating from men who suddenly understood they'd become prey in their own hunting ground. Third, and most importantly, Marcus continued, his voice never rising above conversational level, you forgot that every system has someone who knows how it really works. Storm positioned herself near the outer gate, effectively cutting off any retreat route. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. A living reminder that the balance of power had shifted permanently. Rico finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and hollow. This is my block, my territory. You can't just... Your territory? Marcus interrupted, genuine amusement flickering in his eyes. You mean the territory where you've been torturing military assets worth more than your entire crew combined? The territory where you've been starving trained professionals and calling it entertainment? He gestured to Tank, whose scars told stories of service in places these men couldn't imagine. This dog has saved more lives than everyone in this facility combined. He's detected explosives that would have killed dozens of soldiers. He's tracked enemy combatants through terrain that would break most men. Marcus's voice hardened, carrying the edge of someone who'd seen real violence, real sacrifice, real purpose. And you've been using him as a torture device because you're too ignorant to recognize what you're dealing with. The corridor felt smaller now, closing in around Rico's crew as they backed toward the main facility. Their confident swagger had evaporated, replaced by the jerky movements of men who'd realized they were out of their depth in waters that could drown them. What do you want? Rico managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stopped walking, considering the question with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. Tank sat beside him, patient, alert, ready to respond to whatever command came next. What I want, Marcus said slowly, is for you to understand that things are different now. The rules you've been playing by, the fear you've been trading in, the cruelty you've been calling strength, all of that ends tonight. He knelt beside Tank, his hand finding the sweet spot behind the dog's ears that made the massive animal lean into his touch with something approaching contentment. The gesture was gentle, caring, everything the dog's treatment at this facility had not been. These animals are going to be fed properly from now on. They're going to be treated with the respect they've earned through years of service. They're going to remember what it feels like to have handlers who understand their value. Marcus stood, his eyes finding each member of Rico's crew in turn. And you're going to make sure that happens. Snake laughed nervously, the sound thin and desperate. You think you can just waltz in here and change everything? This place has rules, man. Orders. You're nobody. The laughter died as Tank rose, smoothly to his feet, his attention focused on the young gang member with laser intensity. Not aggressive, not threatening, just alert. Ready. You're right about one thing, Marcus agreed. This place does have rules, but you've been confusing brutality with authority. And that confusion is about to cost you everything you think you've built. They reached the main facility's entrance, where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the familiar sounds of prison life leaked through reinforced doors. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the backdrop against which extraordinary changes were about to unfold. From now on, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the finality of someone issuing orders rather than making requests. The K9 facility operates differently. Professional standards, proper care, respect for the animals who've earned it. Rico tried one last desperate grasp at his fading authority. The guards won't stand for this. The warden, Marcus interrupted, is going to be very interested to learn how his facility has been treating military working dogs. Very interested to discover that valuable government assets have been systematically abused under his watch. The implications hit like hammer blows. Military oversight, federal investigations, the kind of attention that ended careers and opened criminal cases that reached far beyond prison walls. You see, Marcus explained, his tone almost conversational now, these animals didn't just disappear into the system. They have records, service histories, medals, People on the outside who remember their contributions. He paused, letting that information settle into minds that were only beginning to grasp the magnitude of their situation. People who are going to want answers about why decorated veterans are being starved in a county lockup. The facility never recovered from that night. Word spread through every cell block, every corridor, every whispered conversation. Rico's empire crumbled within weeks. His crew scattered like leaves in a hurricane. The man they'd tried to break had shown them what real strength looked like. Marcus Rodriguez became something different at Riverside Correctional. Not a victim, not a predator, but something the system hadn't seen before. A man who understood that true power came from purpose, not brutality. Tank, Diesel, and Storm received proper care for the first time in months, their handlers replaced with people who understood what they were dealing with. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't weak. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone what real authority looks like. And sometimes justice comes with 4 legs and a handler who never forgot his training.